doing? Sweats and sweatshirts.
This is a great way to come to work every day.
Oh, jeez. I don't think we've adjusted totally to non-COVID. That's like my favorite wet weather shirt right there that you're wearing, Liam. He's not that impressed. Okay.
Howie, I don't think we've talked to you since you made the trade with New Orleans. Can you just talk about, what that does for you flexibility-wise?
Yeah, I think we were kind of looking at this year and next year and the amount of picks that we had in this year's draft and trying to kind of balance it a little bit for a variety of factors. When you look at having first-round picks in the fifth-year option, having that many guys on a fifth-year option, also kind of balancing just scouting all the players in this draft and next year's draft and having more options and more flexibility at all positions, kind of giving a head start and looking at next year's draft too and seeing that it's strong as well as this year's draft. So we thought it made sense, obviously from a New Orleans standpoint. We look back, there hadn't been really a team that had moved back that far for a first-round pick, so it made sense for them too, and hopefully a win-win situation.
How much specifically did the quarterback position and being able to have the flexibility there next year if you need it factor into the decision?
Yeah, we're excited about Jalen Hurts, and we're going to support Jalen and want him to have a great career in Philly. And this was about flexibility for our team and about making sure that we had resources to improve our team for not only this year's draft but next year's draft going forward. We thought it made a lot of sense.
Howie, when you look at certain positions heading into the draft, defensive back, wide receiver positions, you didn't really address too much in free agency. How important do those picks become, heading into the draft? Is there more of a priority on those positions than maybe others?
Well, you can't really predict what other teams are going to do, and you can't be in a situation where you have to do something. Certainly when you look at some of the mistakes that I've made personally, it's because you try to force something. So you can only do what the board allows you to do, and there's obviously a lot of time between now and the time the first game starts for us to continue to address the needs of this team, and we'll go into the draft and we'll follow the board. And we've had a lot of discussions, a lot of good discussions about the players in this draft, and we just got to make sure we take the best players and not look at the draft as just a short-term fix.
How are you going into this draft with
Brandon Brown with the Giants? He was part of your draft process until February. Now he's in another team in the division. How big a problem is that for your draft situation, and is there any way to minimize it?
Didn't I send him a thank you note for all he's done? Are you back?
Well, Brady did it, so yeah.
It's a line in the draft right there. Do you think he had that? He had that, or he had that ready? He has it going. I was really just thinking about you being here, which was unexpected. So how did Brandon Brown affect us? Did you ask about Ian too, or just Brandon?
Is this a problem for you in preparing for this draft? He knows a lot about what you're thinking and what your priorities have been up until February. How do you handle that?
I think that's part of what happens when you lose good people is that when you have good people around you, you try to embrace that and have them as part of every discussion that's going on, whether it's about your team and your roster or about free agency or about the draft. But when you talk about February, too, there is that part of the process that Coach and his staff haven't totally dove into it yet. The final boards aren't set. You don't have this kind of seesaw of where you have obviously the scouting and the tape, but you don't also have all the information of the character and the intangibles and the testing. So to say that everything's exactly the same as it was when he and Ian left, it's not. Obviously, the coaches are a big part of our process, and really the amount of work the coaches do in this is a huge part of complementing the scouts, just like we talk about that seesaw with the tape and the testing. We also talk about having the coaches balance it with how they see guys in their scheme. So we miss Brandon, we miss Ian. Also happy for them and their families for the opportunity. And at the end of the day, whatever we got to do for this team, we'll continue to do.
Talk specifically about positions of need. One in particular, safety, at least apparent to us. All right, but that being said, typically you go into the draft at least having those needs covered. Are you comfortable with Anthony Harris and Marcus Epps being your guys right now going into that draft?
Well, I think we have other defensive backs there too. You know, we drafted Kayvon Wallace. We got 2 guys. We brought Andre in here from Indy. We got Jared Maiden here as well. And that's even before the draft. And obviously, you know, we got a long time till we play a game. But we like those guys. That's why we brought Anthony back. That's why we signed him in the first place. That's why we drafted Kayvon. Marcus is a guy who played a lot of football for us last year. We're excited about him too. And so, you know, I don't know that necessarily we perceive it the same way maybe that you described.
To backtrack, Howie, to the loss of Ian and Brandon, you've talked about how this offseason you have a better sense of the coaching staff and what they want in terms of players. Is it fair to say that with those guys gone, the coaching staff, their voice carries a little bit more weight this draft process than last year?
No, the coaching staff has always been our partners in this, and I think for us that was the same when Brandon and Ian were here. That's the same now. You know, I think for Coach and his staff, like being part of the process and giving us their perspectives is huge. I mean, at the end of the day, like as much as we could like a player, if there's not a scheme fit, if there's not a role, if there's not a vision, then it doesn't matter, you know, because we're not down on that field. And I think the partnership that we have with our coaching staff is special. It's been a really fun process, but the coaches also deferred to the fact that these guys spend a lot of time and know these guys really well. And our scouting staff, our coaching staff, the amount of hours they put in together. So, you know, I feel like it's very balanced in terms of the inputs from both those sides.
Can I ask Nick? I want to involve Nick here a little bit. Thanks. What side of the football do you, as the head coach, think the team needs to improve more in the draft?
Well, you know, you're always looking to make your team better as good as you possibly can, and you know, so you're looking at all accounts. And so I don't think it's fair for me to say, oh well, okay, offense is more important than defense, or defense is more important than offense. We're just looking, obviously, to get our team better, and how do you do that? You get that with good players.
But that's not answering the question.
Yeah,
I mean, you
danced
do
around
have
it a
some
little bit.
thoughts on which side you think needs improvement, right?
Again, going back to again, you think about the players that you need, the players that you want, but one thing I can say is, and again, I don't think that's fair for me to say right now. Again, I think 31 other teams would want me to give that answer to you, Howard. But and you know, with them listening. But one thing that is very important is obviously the talent of the player, but then also the characteristics of the player, right? And those are things that are there for you to find out in the scouting process. Do they have high football IQ? Do they have good character? Are they tough? Those are things that you really can see and find out. And then in addition, do they love football and are they competitive? And so, again, I think I've said this before, my experience is guys that have those 5 traits, they maximize their potential. And so that's what we want. We want to be able to get guys in here that can maximize potential both offensively, defensively, and special teams-wise.
Did he answer the question, Howard? I mean, is that a new sports machine jacket? Is that new?
I'm bringing back retro, yeah.
Experiences you've had with both Atlanta Dickerson and Sidney Jones, what variables do you take into account with these draft process injuries, and specifically with, say, David Ajabo or Jameson Williams? How do you account for maybe not just the physical recovery, but whether it's the confidence or the return to form after the injury?
I think the more time you have between the injury and the draft, the more information you get. So for us, with Landon, the timing of that was a little different than the timing with Sidney, and it allowed you to see more of the progress of where it was based on the testing. Obviously, 2 different positions, different injuries, and so you take that all into account when you're looking at it, and then the value has to be right. You know, the value of the player and how we kind of feel the player fits for us, and what kind of player we think that player was pre-injury, how we base on our performance and our medical staff, who we have a lot of trust in, how they project that player to come back. And you know, the draft's guesswork as it is. You're talking about taking guys, changing their environment, moving them from college to the NFL, putting money in their pocket, giving them more free time, changing schemes, and now you have another variable. So you got to balance that as well.
You look at your first uncertainty, the top of the draft. Obviously, you're at 15, so you got to deal with 14 picks. It seems like this year is a little bit more uncertain when you look around the league. Do Do you see that with the board? Like last year, Trevor was consensus, pretty much number one. Do you see more uncertainty in this year?
We see maybe the team's uncertainty about who particular teams are going to take, less so necessarily who we think those players would be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about. Those teams in front of you, do you have a better feel or a worse feel in a typical year for what they think? Is it more difficult is what I'm trying to say?
I think that there's consistency in terms of the players that we see going probably in the top 20. Now a couple of those could change, but I don't think it's so drastically different in terms of the players that are going to go in the top 20. I think where it will start to change is after that. I think you're going to see a lot of different boards, some guys that are going between 21 and maybe 51 where we pick in the second round. You'll see a lot of variables that go into those picks.
To follow up on that too, is I've heard a lot of comparisons, seen a lot of comparisons from this draft to 2013. You seem very sure about how you see the draft playing out. You guys were able to navigate.
Sure of anything, Jeff.
You were able to navigate you were able to navigate that draft, which turned in the long run not to be very strong, but that ended up being one of your better drafts. How do you feel about that in relation to this draft?
Definitely a backhanded compliment. Appreciate that.
It's a total compliment.
But I think that people think about the 2013 draft because of the quarterback position. And if I remember correctly, Buffalo traded back in that draft and took E.J. Manuel, and I think that people are talking about this, like, when will the quarterbacks go? And so when anyone ever talks about drafts, they start with the quarterbacks and feeling like the quarterbacks are kind of the anchor of any draft. And so there's some uncertainty about where the quarterbacks go in this draft. And I think for us, we just go by our rankings and what we think is the right way to stack the board, and we'll be prepared to take our 15th player at 15 and our 18th player at 18.
Howie, curious to get your take on the boom and wide receiver contracts of late and how that kind of shapes your opinion of the value of drafting a wide receiver.
Yeah, I think every year position kind of becomes like, I like that word, the boom. It's like the new mining town, right? It's like it becomes, you have pass rushers, you have offensive linemen, and now you got wide receivers. And so I think at the end of the day, we talked about this a little bit when we were at the league meetings. It's just, you got to make a decision, on what your priorities are on building the team, and whether you're going to kind of go with the flow or you're going to kind of figure out what is the most important thing for your team, and if there's some value in being different and figuring out what now is kind of the next area. And I think we spend a lot of time, Coach and I talk about this all the time, like, if we're going to be the same as everyone else, we're probably going to finish in the middle of the pack. And sometimes you got to take risks and you got to kind of stand out there and do something different than everyone else. And so that doesn't mean that there aren't right decisions to make at that position, but at the same time, if you're doing the same thing that everyone else is doing, you're probably, a step late.
Howie, I'm curious about, you've been very active, obviously, on draft day with trades. Curious about the process. How much of that work happens before the draft? How much are you crafting those trades as things go on? Mm-hmm. How many different plans do you have? How many people are involved in all that? And just what that process is like?
In the first round, we've always found that it's helpful to have those trades mapped out beforehand. And the way that goes isn't like, hey, we're definitely doing this. It's, if we're moving up, hey, if there's a player that we want that falls to that spot, here's what we would do. Are we good on the trade compensation? So that you pick up the phone and I say, hey, Nick, the guy's still there. You guys good? Yeah, trade's done. So you're not sitting there and going, we think it should be this, and they think it should be this and this. It's too hectic to do that in the first round. Now, after the first round, it's probably too hard to map those out. So when you get into the second round, third round, and beyond, it's those things do happen on the clock because they're simpler. But when it gets into the first round, all those conversations will be had before the fact. Even our trade last year was kind of, we kind of set parameters of what that was. And so when we picked up the phone and called Dallas, we kind of knew what the trade was going to be and what the price was going to be, and that we had discussed that. So I think that's the easier way to go in the first round, so you're not in a situation where, you guys are kind of scrambling, because there's a lot to do when you're in the first round. You move up, you take a pick, now you're on the clock. Now you got to get situated. You got to call in the trade. You got to make sure your guy's there. So that's how we do it. My feeling is that that's how a lot of teams do it, just based on the conversation we've had throughout the years. And I think it just makes it flow easier.
How many different scenarios would you say you have, like, ready to go, ready to spring if it works out?
We have 2 picks, right? So I think you're planning every scenario about who you'd move up for, who you'd be really comfortable staying, how many players you'd be comfortable staying, and what are the tiers that you'd move back for, and what you would take. Obviously, like there's a price that doesn't make sense to move back either. We're not going to move back 10 picks for a 5th-round pick. So I think that at the end of the day, you kind of go through all those, and you have a really good sense of what you want to do. And I think for us and New Orleans, that was one of the comforts of the trade. Like we both knew what we were comfortable for. It didn't really matter what the trade chart said. They were comfortable with the deal, and we were comfortable with the deal. And I think those are the best trades.
Going back to the wide receivers, you guys have used early picks on them the last couple of years. Are there lessons you can take away from those picks? And you've talked about how hard they are to evaluate. Is there something you can take away from the last few years?
Yeah, I think you're constantly evaluating the things that you do wrong, and you also want to learn from the things you did right and the lessons that you have from that. And we discussed that a lot about the scenarios where we've done good things, and I'll obviously, this is a hard process. Like you're going to mess things up, but what can you learn from those picks that didn't work out? I would say, with Jalen. Obviously, I know he gets a lot of attention in the city, and I know he's working his butt off. And, when you look back, we were having this conversation this morning with our strength and conditioning staff. Like that was a hard year for some guys because you had COVID, you didn't have an off-season program. And so, sometimes the book isn't necessarily written on all those guys.
When you look at linebackers this year, it seems like they're not as bad, many being talked about as much as, like Devin Lloyd and like Kobe Dean. What do you feel about, like, from general manager's perspective, what do you feel like the value seems to be going down with those guys in that position? Do you ever foresee it being cyclical and them being up there?
There's different guys at that position, and when you talk about off-ball linebackers, their value in the passing game is important, and so there's different values in the passing game. Obviously, pressuring the quarterback, being able to blitz and create pressure is a part of that too, but being able to match and mirror routes, being able to make plays in the passing game, I think is an important part of that too. Being instinctive. So you're talking about really good players that you just mentioned, obviously, and I don't know what the attention's going on in the media, but I know this is a good linebacking class, and I think there'll be a lot of good players that come out.
If you look at your first rounds over your career as GM, you've done better in pre-14 picks versus post-14. Clearly, that's going to happen more often than not. But have you done a study saying that you guys are in the norm versus the rest of the league in relation to those picks, or is there something that's missing when you guys get past that pick, number 14?
Yeah, I think obviously, like I hope we're picking in the late 20s and early 30s as much as possible. But when you look at the history of the draft and you really look at it and you break it down into like 1 through 10, 11 through 20, 21 through 32, the hit rate's going to decrease naturally. And why is that? Well, one, I don't know that there's any draft, and I don't know that you'd find any team in the league who's going to say, I got 32 first-round grades on guys. I got 32 blue players. I got 32 potential Pro Bowlers. That's never going to happen. So at every draft, there is a cutoff on difference makers, right? And so that doesn't mean you're going to be right on the difference makers. I mean, think about all the top 10 picks that haven't worked either. But usually those guys who have such a unique skill set, such unique tools in their body, that they have a different chance to hit than other guys. And so I think that the higher you pick, the better chance you have of obviously getting a player who's got the full complement of skill sets, good production, good tools in their body, good character. Those guys go really quick on draft day. And as you go through the draft, whether it's in the first round, second round, third round, fourth round, fifth round, it gets harder just naturally because the amount of players, the funnel gets smaller. I also think, and I had this conversation with, probably maybe one of the greatest GMs in NFL history on a beach a long time ago, and it was like 10 years ago, my draft board and your draft board were going to be different, right? We had scouts go to these small school places. Not everyone knew anything. I don't even know if it's 10 years ago at this point, 15 years ago, right? And so the top 100 players on my board, you may have 75 of those guys. But now we're basically in the information age where that everyone really knows who the players are, who the top 100 players are going to be. Now, that doesn't mean we have them in the same order. But there's not as many surprises. There's not as many, wow, like I don't know where that guy came from. We were talking in our draft meetings, like, I know in 2007, 2008, I remember watching guys, is it a disc that you put in the computer? You used to watch guys and use your computer to kind of go through it. Like, you were going through those guys and shoot, we drafted a guy, Andy Studebaker. You go talk to Ryan Grigson. Ryan Grigson brought us a freaking DVD of Andy Studebaker. That was the first look at Andy Studebaker before we gave it to Doc and freaking put it in the system. Well, that ain't happening anymore, right? Like, everyone's going to know that guy. So I think the process has changed. What's my point in all this? Maybe not much. But I think that at the end of the day, what we're saying is like everyone's getting all this information, right? So it's not where all of a sudden, I promise you one thing. Whoever we take in the third round, you're going to freaking know, right? Like, you may not have a couple of years ago, Chris Gokong, maybe you looked for and go, man, I got to find freaking Cal Poly stuff. So all this information is at your fingertips, and so it just makes everything narrower and your margin for error narrower.
Howie, Jeffrey mentioned that.
Zach had a question for Nick.
He just wants to get me involved.
Get on the ball early.
Like Howard. On the pro day circuit, if you will. What's your personal approach to scouting? How familiar you get with all the prospects, and how hands-on are you in the meetings?
I like to watch as many guys as I possibly can, knowing that my expertise is more on the offensive side. That doesn't mean I'm not watching the defensive side, but my expertise is more on that side, especially with the skill players, with the quarterbacks, with the receivers, with the tight ends, with the running backs. But I feel like I'm able to give some good perspective on the defensive players as well, in the sense of what it's like for an offensive coach to game plan against. That's kind of how, to go about defensive players. Like, what is it going to be like for an offensive coach to game plan against this defensive coach? So want to try to get my eyes as many guys as possible, knowing where my expertise are. As far as knowing the player, I think that's really important. Obviously, I can't physically talk to every single player in the draft, but I want to be involved as many of the Zooms as I possibly can be, as many of the 30 visits, when they come in here, the combine interviews, the Senior Bowl interviews, because I want to know the person as well and how that fits in for us. So, did I answer your question, Zach? Okay.
He's got a passion for it, Zach. He loves doing it. He loves watching football. He loves talking about it. He's got a passion for it. Though he did tell me today to remind me that the offseason program starts on Monday.
We have Tim, and then we'll have time for one more after that.
Howie, Jeffrey had mentioned at the owners' meetings the importance of psychological testing as part of this evaluation. Can you take us into that process as much as you can, kind of what you're looking for? And then, Nick, having been at a couple different previous stops, maybe something that's different about what you see here with that component.
We try to dig deep into the background and the character, and the first credit to that goes to our scouts. All the guys that are on the road all year, they do a tremendous job of being experts in their school and in their players, and so they're the ones who really alert us to some guys that we may need to spend extra time with. Then all you guys know Dom, and there's nobody better in the National Football League than Dom DeSandro about getting to the bottom of guys and figuring out guys and talking to guys and understanding who are risks and who are fits for this team. He knows our team backwards and forwards. He knows the players that fit for our culture, for our team and our city. And so very fortunate to have those two pieces. And then we have experts who do talk to the guys that we have some questions on and try to get to the bottom of it. It's Coach and I can think we're good interviewing players, but at the end of the day, like, we didn't go to school for it. We don't have that area of expertise, and so we try to do that and really put up, just like we do a player evaluation, we try to do a character evaluation on all these guys. And now some of them are easy, right? Like, some of them are really easy. It's not too hard to figure out. A 3-time captain in the SEC, and Devontae didn't take long to figure out, right? Like Landon didn't take long to figure out. But some of these guys, they're complicated. And so we spent a lot of time talking about them and getting as much background and talking to as many experts as we can to try to figure out the person as much as the player.
Hey, Nick, to kind of follow up on Zach's question before, just last year at this time, obviously you're the head coach for the first time, getting your feet on the ground. Has there been an evolution to you and your staff for this process? Is it a little bit easier the second time around?
Yeah, I mean, of course, because you're not showing for the first time. You're not going through the process for the first time together. I think one thing I know that coaches in my past have prepared me for is to be able to clearly define what you see and how you're going to use a player. And so I think that's just the thing that's made it easier is you guys already know how we're going to use guys, and that doesn't mean you don't continue to have those conversations or they don't evolve, they don't change a little bit here and there, because you're constantly changing your process, you're constantly tweaking it to make it better, and so those conversations happen. But mostly the conversations of, hey, this is how we would use a player with this skill set. It'd be, here's what we would do, how we would use them. Here's a player in the past, how we've had those. And so we're just continuing to build on that, and that we started last year.
If I can sneak an off-season program question in, why the late start and why fewer practices than allowed?
Fewer practices than who?
Than you're permitted to have.
I thought you said Atlanta. Well, again, a lot of everything that we do is going to be thought out of with the players' health and safety in mind very first, and so that was one thing we felt like we did a good job last year of staying healthy, for different reasons and different thoughts and everybody's voices going into it. I got to make the decision on as far as what the final decision is, but we really felt like we benefited from some of those things that we did last year of the time length of the things that we did. We felt like we were able to get what we needed to get done in those weeks that we had last year. And so we wanted to be able to, we know we were going to be in person more this time, and we're going to see them face to face more this time. But we just wanted to do what we felt were comfortable for the players, safe and healthy, or safety and health, and while also getting what we needed to get done. And we feel like, that's where we are. We're comfortable with that's where we are with the amount of time that we're spending in this off season.
Howie, do you have an opinion? Last one?
About off-season program?
Yeah, I mean, and just how it relates to player health and the things that you guys have done.
Get into that too. No, I Coach talked to me about it, and I think what he's saying makes a ton of sense. So excited to get the players back on Monday.
All right. Thanks.